Parents had told the people there that had paranoid schizophrenia, which I was diagnosed with at a very young age, at the age of 18, which, I mean, I still don't believe I'm schizophrenic, but it is what it is. Uh, and I don't live in like a state of denial in regards to it. It was just, that's a whole other story I don't want to get into. But my parents decided to talk to the people there at MDC and try to convince them and tell them that I had a mental disorder and I had to be transferred to a better unit and what have you. But I had to like show them that I was, sincerely crazy. So when I was in court, I decided to, and I knew it would play into their sensibilities. I decided to choke myself while I was in court. Like very vividly, I decided to choke myself, and I used that for my own advantage. I was, transferred to the psych unit thereafter, and they had yoga, they had creative writing, they had Tai Chi. It was just wonderful. I was in 23.5-hour lockdown in solitary confinement, and I moved to another unit where we had the entire pod to roam around in and do what we would like to do. I was also able to teach classes there, and that's where I learned, like, I would be able to become this intellectual guy that I've always wanted to be. You know what I'm saying? And that was like my opportunity. Like I had to take advantage of that. Either if I didn't, I would be completely screwed. My entire subjective reality would be undermined and what have you. It was tough. It was very difficult. But I knew that was the time that I had to like step my game up, so to speak, while I was there at MDC. And so I did. I was teaching classes to, criminals about anxiety and morality and what have you. And I also was the janitor. I cleaned up after people. And finally, after like 9 months, I was released, and it was crazy. Like it was such a beautiful, relieving feeling. There's no other way to describe it. There's no other way. You can't describe it with a line of coke. You can't describe it with any drug or alcohol. It was just a beautiful moment to be released from jail and be able to hug my mom instead of see her through like a video camera. It was just like torture seeing her through that. And to be able to see my mom and like hold her and hug her, that was like a crazy moment for me. And then like after I was released, I had to do like 9 months of like probation through the district attorney. So I had to be drug tested, I had to be monitored, I had to do community service. And I didn't want to get rid of these convictions I had that the system was a broken system. And I went, the hell that I went through and what have you for drugs and alcohol was not a really viable reformative option for me. And I've maintained those convictions, throughout the years, and it's been a very difficult, troubling time for me to be able to go through this, journey through law and what have you in America. It just sucks. It's terrible. But then I also have to look back at how I was raised, and so I always wanted to tell my dad like what he felt about the accomplishments I've made after I was released from jail. If he would ever be able to realize that I've made strides in changing myself, and I've made my accomplishments and what have you, and if for whatever reason he would be able to acknowledge these things. I have never been able to have this conversation with him yet, and it's not something I'm trying to prove to him. I'm trying to prove to myself that I'm worth somebody. You know what I'm saying? That I'm trying to accomplish something. And it's tough though. Because you can convince somebody all you want about who you are now, but your past will always be with you. You know what I'm saying? Your past will always be with you, and I know I will always be considered a criminal in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of society. I will never be considered a reformed criminal. I know all the connotations that come with it. I know all the nuances that come with it. I've learned a lot throughout the years, and I'm being very frank and quick about this. You know, that I've gone through my existential moments where I didn't feel like people understood me or anything like that, and have managed to be able to become a competent, civilized citizen. You know, but I've never been able to have this conversation with my dad, whether he would feel like I've accomplished something in my life, and I don't think I ever will be able to until I graduate from college, from UNM. You know, and I've gone to Denver, I've gone to Washington D.C. You know, I've been in the National Honor Society. You know, I've done radio pieces. I've written an essay that I got published. I've written a book. You know, I have a little bit of success in me, intellectually and what have you, but I really don't think that my dad would ever be able to fully recognize what I've accomplished. And I kind of don't want him to, you know. But, you know, I've gone through these things where I felt like I was culturally conditioned to be a certain type of person. And I don't want to sway too much away from that. Because I am who I am. I was the way I was raised, you know. And I don't want to deny my cultural roots, my heritage, anything like that. But, you know, I am who I am. And a lot of it has to do with how I was raised and my environment. And I try not to blame anybody, you know what I'm saying? I hold myself accountable for a lot, you know, in a very, like, apprehensive and, like, repressed way. And I've gone through fluctuations of depression, you know, of having manic episodes, you know. And it's been tough, you know what I'm saying? I'm a very competent intellectual human being, but I've gone through my things, and it's hard to be able to not have those things bubble up every now and then, you know. And so that's kind of my story. I kind of didn't want to be too tragic, you know, but I wanted to be frank. I wanted to just be matter of fact, you know, like, I've gone through my things, and I try not to hold anybody accountable for them. But I was raised in a very interesting way that I believe not many people are raised the way I was raised. Like my dad, the way he raised me, it was like this. I was to be, you know, the predecessor of his patriarchy. You know what I'm saying? And I was not feeling it, you know. And I've still have managed to have my own ideological reasoning behind who I am and what have you. And it's hard to maintain these principles and values in a culture that seemingly likes to appraise patriarchal values and what have you, and being in a family like that. And it's been destructive for me, you know what I'm saying? It's hard to say that anything good has come out of the way I was raised in retrospect, but I think I was raised in a really wonderful, loving family, and they did what they could. But, you know, just the way culture is framed around being a risk taker, you know what I'm saying, being unapologetic or remorseless, or, you know, those are very, you know, desecrated virtues of the way I was raised. You know, it doesn't do justice to the notion of the morality that I was embedded. But I was raised under these notions that I'm a man and I could do whatever I want and what have you, and I was willing to take those risks, you know. And being a queer, and I knew I was gay at a very young age, or at least queer at a very young age. That it was gonna be tough, you know what I'm saying? And I went through a lot of self-hatred, you know, felt like an emasculated little guy for a very long time, you know, and I felt like a lot of the impressions that I had to bestow on others was that I wasn't gonna be emasculated by others, and that was tough, you know. And like I said, I've gone through jail and what have you, and all of these consequences I could easily attribute to my environment and the way I was raised. you know, but it's a very pragmatic, precarious thing, because in my family and society for that matter, you can't hold anybody else accountable other than yourself. You know, that is the general understanding.